Hello, and welcome back to Key Philosophies. Today we will be carrying on with Kalil Gibran's work, a follow up to The Prophet in the Omnibus collection I have here. This is The Wanderer, His Parables and His Sayings, an interesting collection of small stories or short stories that I find quite entertaining. So, to begin, The Wanderer. I met him at the crossroads, a man with but a cloak and a staff, and a veil of pain upon his face. And we greeted one another. And I said to him, "Come to my house and be my guest." And he came. My wife and my children met us at the threshold, and he smiled at them, and they loved his coming. Then we all sat together at the board, and we were happy with the man, for there was a silence and a mystery in him. And after supper, we gathered to the fire, and I asked him about his wanderings. He told us many a tale that night, and also the next day, but what I now record was born out of the bitterness of his days, though he himself was kindly, and these tales are of dust and the patience of his road. And when he left us, about 3 days, after 3 days, we did not feel that a guest had departed, but rather that one of us was still out in the garden, and had not yet come in. Garments. Garments. Upon a day, beauty and ugliness met on the shore of the sea, and they said to one another, "Let us bathe in the sea." Then they disrobed and swam in the waters, and after a while, ugliness came back to the shore, and garmented himself with the garments of beauty, and walked his way. And beauty too came out of the sea, and found not her raiment, and she was too shy to be naked. Therefore she dressed herself with the raiment of ugliness, and beauty walked her way. And to this very day men and women mistake one for the other. Yet some there are who have beheld the face of beauty, and they know not her, and they know her notwithstanding her garment. Say again. Yet some there are who have beheld the face of beauty, and they know her notwithstanding her garments. And some there be who know not the face of ugliness, and the cloth conceals him not from their eyes. The Eagle and the Skylark. A skylark and an eagle met on a rock upon a high hill. The skylark said, "Good morrow to you, sir." And the eagle looked upon him and said faintly, "Good morrow." And the skylark said, "I hope all things are well with you, sir." "Aye," said the eagle, "all is well with us. But do you not know that we are the king of birds, and that you shall not address us before we ourselves have spoken?" Said the skylark, "Methinks we are of the same family." The eagle looked upon him with disdain, and he said, "Whoever has said that, you and I are of the same family." Then said the skylark, "But I would remind you of this. I can fly even as high as you, and I can sing and give delight to the other creatures of the earth, and you give neither pleasure nor delight." Then the eagle was angered, and he said, "Pleasure and delight, you little pompous creature. With one thrust of my beak I could destroy you. You are but the size of my foot." Then the skylark flew up and alighted upon the back of the eagle, and began to pick at his feathers. The eagle was annoyed, and he flew and swift and high that he might rid himself of the little bird, but he had failed to do so. At last he dropped back to the very rock upon the high bill, more fretted than ever, with the little creature still upon his back, and cursing the fate of the hour. Now, at that moment, A small turtle came by and laughed at the sight, and laughed so hard that she almost turned upon her back. And the eagle looked down upon the turtle, and he said, "You slow creeping thing, ever one with the earth, what are you laughing at?" And the turtle said, "Why, I see that you are turned horse, and that you have a small bird riding you. But that small bird is the better bird." And the eagle said to her, "Go you about your business. This is a family affair between me and my brother, the lark, and myself." Pretty good, I thought. The Love Song. A poet once wrote a love song, and it was a beautiful love song, and he made many copies of it, and sent them to his friends and his acquaintances, both men and women, and even to young women whom he had met but once, who lived beyond the mountains. And in a day or two a messenger came from the young woman bringing a letter, and in the letter she said, "Let me assure you, I am deeply touched by your love song that you have written to me. Come now and see my father and my mother, and we shall make arrangements for the betrothal." Betrothal. And the poet answered the letter, and he said to her, "My friend, it was but a song of love out of a poet's heart, sung by every man to every woman." And she wrote again to him, saying, "Hypocrite, liar in words, from this day on to my coffin, I shall hate all poets for your sake." Tears and Laughter. Upon the bank of the Nile at eventide, a hyena met a crocodile, and they stopped and greeted one another. The hyena spoke and said, "How goes the day with you, sir?" And the crocodile answered, saying, "It goes badly with me. Sometimes in my pain and sorrow I weep, and then the creatures always say, they are but crocodile tears, and this wounds me beyond all telling." Then the hyena said, "You speak of your pain and your sorrow, but you think of me also. For a moment I gaze at the beauty of the world, its wonders and its miracles, and out of sheer joy I laugh, even as the day laughs. But then the people of the jungle say, it is but the laughter of the hyena." At the fair. At the fair, there came at the fair a girl from the countryside, most comely. There was a lily and a rose in her face. There was sunset in her hair, and dawn smiled upon her lips. No sooner did the lovely stranger appear in their sight than the young men sought her and surrounded her. One would dance with her, and another would cut a cake in her honor, and they all desired to kiss her cheek, for after all, it was, or was it not, the fair? But the girl was shocked and startled, and she thought ill of the young men. She rebuked them, and she even struck one or two of them in the face. Then she ran from them. And on her way home that evening, she was saying in her heart, "I am disgusted. How unmannerly and ill-bred are these men. It is beyond all patience." A year passed, during which that very comely girl thought much of fairs and men. Then she came again to the fair with the lily and the rose in her face, the sunset in her hair, and the smile of dawn upon her lips. But now the young men, seeing her, turned from her, and all the day long she was unsought and alone. And at eventide, as she walked the road toward her home, she cried in her heart, "I am disgusted. How unmannerly and ill-bred are these youths. It is beyond all patience." The Two Princesses. In the city of Shawakis lived a prince, and he was loved by everyone. Men and women and children, even the animals of the field, came unto him in greeting. But all the people said that his wife, the princess, loved him not, nay, that she even hated him. Upon that day, the princess of the neighboring city came to visit the prince of Shawakis, and they sat and talked together, and their words led to their husbands. And the princess of Shawakis said with passion, I envy you your happiness with your prince, your husband. Though you have been married these many years, I hate my husband. He belongs not to me alone, and I am indeed a woman most unhappy. Then the visiting princess gazed at her and said, My friend, the truth is that you love your husband. That you still have for him a passion unspent, and that is life in woman like unto spring in a garden. But pity me, my husband, for we do but endure one another in silent patience, and yet you and others deem this happiness. The lightning flash. There was a Christian bishop in his cathedral on a stormy day, and an unchristian woman came and stood before him. And she said, I am not a Christian. Is there salvation for me from hell fire? And the bishop looked upon the woman, and he answered her saying, Nay, there is salvation for those only who are baptized in the water of the Spirit. And even as he spoke, a bolt from the sky fell with thunder upon the cathedral, and it was filled with fire. And the men of the city came running, and they saved the woman, but the bishop was consumed. Food for the fire. The Hermit and the Beasts. Once there lived among the green hills a hermit. He was pure of spirit and white of heart. And all the animals of the land and all the fowls of the air came to him in pairs, and he spoke unto them. They heard him gladly, and they would gather near unto him, and would not go until nightfall, when he would send them away, entrusting them to the wind and the woods with his blessing. Upon an evening, as he was speaking of love, a leopard raised her head and said to the hermit, You speak of us loving. Tell us, sir, where is your mate? And the hermit said, I have no mate. Then a great cry of surprise rose from the company of beasts and fowls, and they began to say amongst themselves, How can he tell us of loving and mating when he himself knows not thereof? And quietly and in disdain they left him alone. That night the hermit lay upon his mat with his face earthward, and he wept bitterly and beat his hands upon his breast. The Prophet and the Child. Once on a day the prophet Shariah met a child in the garden. The child ran to him and said, Good morrow to you, sir. And the prophet said, Good morrow to you, sir. And in the moment I see that you are alone. Then the child said, in laughter and delight, It took a long time to lose my nurse. She thinks I am behind those hedges, but can't you see that I am here? Then he gazed at the prophet's face and spoke again. You are alone too. What did you do with your nurse? The prophet answered and said, Ah, that is a different thing. In very truth, I cannot lose her oftentimes. But now, when I came into this garden, she was seeking after me behind the hedges. The child clapped his hands and cried, So you are lost like me. Isn't it good to be lost? Then he said, Who are you? And the man answered, They call me the prophet Shariah. And tell me, who are you? I am only myself, said the child, and my nurse is seeking after me, and she does not know where I am. Then the prophet gazed into the space, saying, I too have escaped my nurse for a while, but she will find me out. And the child said, I know mine will find me out too. And at that moment, a woman's voice was heard, calling the child's name. See, said the child, I told you she would find me. And at the same moment, another voice was heard. Where art thou, Shariah? And the prophet said, See, my child, they have found me also. And turning his face upward, Shariah answered, Here I am. The pearl. Said one to the oyster, to a neighboring oyster. That was totally broken. Excuse me, I'll take a drink of Red Bull. The pearl. The pearl. Said one oyster to a neighboring oyster, I have a very great pain within me. It is heavy and round, and I am in distress. And the other oyster replied with a heighty complacence, Praise be to the heavens and to the sea. I have no pain within me. I am well and whole, both within and without. At that moment a crab was passing by and heard the two oysters, and he said to the one who was well and the whole, both within and without, Yes, you are whole and well, but the pain that your neighbor bears is a pearl of exceeding beauty. The pearl. Body and soul. A man and a woman sat by a window that opened upon spring. They sat close one unto the other, and the woman said, I love you. You are handsome, and you are rich, and you are always well attired. And the man said, I love you. You are beautiful. And the man said, I love you. You are a beautiful thought, a thing too apart to hold in the hand, and a song in my dreaming. But the woman turned from him in anger, and she said, Sir, please leave me right now. I am not a thought, and I am not a thing that passes in your dreams. I am a woman. I would have you desire me a wife and a mother of unborn children. And they parted. And the man was saying in his heart, Behold, another dream is given now turned unto the mist. And the woman was saying, Well, what of a man who turns me into a mist and a dream? The king. The people of the kingdom of Sadiq surrounded the palace of their king, shouting in rebellion against him. And he came down the steps of the palace, carrying his crown in one hand and his scepter in the other. The majesty of his appearance silenced the multitude, and he stood before them and said, My friends, who are no longer my subjects, here I yield my crown and scepter to you. I would be one of you. I am only one man, but as a man I would work together with you that our lot may be made better. There is no need for a king. Let us go therefore to the fields and to the vineyards and labor hand with hand. Only you must tell me of what field or vineyard I should go, and all of you now are king. And the people marveled, and stillness was upon them, for the king, whom they had deemed the source of their discontent, now yielded his crown and scepter to them, and became as one of them. Then each and every one of them went his way, and the king walked with one man to a field. But the kingdom of Sadiq fared not better without a king, and the midst of discontent was still upon the land, and the people cried out in the marketplaces, saying that they would be governed, and that they would have a king to rule them. And the elders and the youth said, as if one voice, we will have our king. And they sought the king, and found him toiling in the field, and they brought him to his seat, and yielded unto him his crown and his scepter, and they said, now rule us with might and with justice. And he said, I will indeed rule you with might, and may the gods of the heavens and the earth help me, that I may also rule with justice. Now there came to this presence men and women, and spoke unto him of a baron who mistreated them, and to whom they were but serfs. And straightway the king brought the baron before him, and said, the life of one man is as weighty in the scales of God as the life of another. And because you know not how to weigh the lives of those who work in your fields and your vineyards, you are banished, and you shall leave this kingdom forever. The following day came, and another company to the king spoke of the cruelty of a countess beyond the hills, and how she brought them down in misery. Instantly the countess was brought to the court, and the king sentenced her also to banishment, saying, those who till our fields and care for our vineyards are nobler than we who eat the bread they prepare and drink the wine of their winepress. And because you know not this, you shall leave this land and be far from this kingdom. Then came men and women who said that the bishop made them bring stones and hew the stones for the cathedral, yet he gave them not, though they knew the bishop's coffer was full of gold and silver, while they themselves were empty with hunger. And the king called for the bishop, and when the bishop came to the king, and spoke, and said unto him, that cross you wear upon your bosom should mean giving life unto life, but you have taken life from life, and you have given none. Therefore you shall leave this kingdom, and will never return. Thus each day for a full moon men and women came to the king to tell them of burdens laid unto them, and each and every day for a full moon some oppressor was exiled from the land. And the people of Sadiq were amazed, and there was cheer in their hearts. And upon a day the elder and the youths came and surrounded the tower of the king, and called for him. And he came down, holding his crown with one hand and his scepter in the other, and he spoke unto them and said, now what would you of me? Behold, I yield back to you that which you desire me to hold. But they cried, nay, nay, you are our rightful king. You have made clean the land of vipers, and you have brought the wolves to naught, and we come to sing our thanksgiving unto you. The crown is yours in majesty, and the scepter is yours in glory. Then the king said, not I, not I. You yourselves are king. When you deemed me weak and a misruler, you yourselves were weak and misruling. And now the land fares well because it is in your will. I am but a thought in the mind of you all, and I exist not save in your actions. There is no such person as governor. Only the governed exist to govern themselves. And the king re-entered his tower with his crown and his scepter, and the elders and the youths went their various ways, and they were content. And each and every one thought of himself as a king with a crown in one hand and a scepter in the other. Upon the sand. Said one man to another, at the high tide of the sea, long ago, with the point of my staff I wrote a line upon the sand, and the people still pause to read it, and they are careful that naught shall erase it. And the other man said, and I too wrote a line in the sand, and but it was a low tide, and the wave of the vast sea washed it all away. But tell me, what did you write? And the first man answered and said, I wrote this, I am he who is. But what did you write? And the other man said, I wrote this, I am but a drop of this great ocean. The Three Gifts. The Three Gifts. Once in the city of Beshar, there lived a gracious prince who was loved and honored by all his subjects. But there was one exceedingly poor man who was bitter against the prince, and who waged continually a pestilent tongue in his dispraise. The prince knew this, yet he was patient. But at last he bethought him, and upon a wintry night there came to the door of the man a servant of the prince, bearing a sack of flour, and a bag of soap, and a cone of sugar. And the servant said, The prince sends you these gifts in token of remembrance. And the man was elated, for he thought the gifts were an homage from the prince, and in his pride he went to the bishop and told him that what the prince had done, saying, Can you not see how the prince desires my good will? But the bishop said, Oh, how wise a prince, and how little you understand. He speaks in symbols. The flour is for your empty stomachs, the soap is for your dirty hide, and the sugar is to sweeten your bitter tongue. From that day forward, the man became shy even of himself. His hatred of the prince was greater than ever, and even more he hated the bishop who had revealed the prince unto him. But thereafter he kept silent. So yeah. Peace and War. 3 dogs were basking in the sun and conversing. The first dog said dreamily, It is indeed wondrous to be living in this day of dogdom. Consider the ease with which we travel under the sea, upon the earth, and even in the sky, and meditate for a moment upon the inventions brought forth for the comfort of dogs, even for our eyes and ears and noses. And the second dog spoke, and he said, We are more heedful of the arts. We bark at the moon more rhythmically than did our forefathers. And when we gaze at ourselves in the water, we see that our features are clearer than the features of yesterday. Then the third dog spake and said, But what interests me most, and beguiles my mind, is the tranquil understanding existing between dogdoms. At that very moment they looked, and lo, the dog catcher was approaching. The 3 dogs sprang up and scampered down the street. And as they ran, the third dog said, For God's sake, run for your lives. Civilization is after us. The Dancer. Once there came to the court of a prince, the prince of Berkasha, a dancer with her musicians, and she was admitted to the court, and she danced before the prince to the music of the lute, and the flute, and zither. She danced, and danced of flames, and the dance of swords and spears. She danced the dance of stars, and the dance of space, and then she danced the dance of flowers in the wind. After this she stood before the throne of the prince, and bowed her body before him. And the prince bade her to come nearer, and he said unto her, Beautiful woman, daughter of grace and delight, whence comes your art? And how is it that you command all the elements in your rhythms and your rhymes? And the dancer lowed again before the prince, and she answered, Mighty and gracious majesty, I know not the answer to your questioning. Only this I know. The philosopher's soul dwells in his head. The poet's soul is in his heart, and the singer's soul lingers about his throat. But the soul of the dancer abides in all her body. The two guardian angels. On an evening, two angels met at the city gate, and they greeted one another, and they conversed. The one angel said, "What are you doing these days? And what work is given you?" And the other answered, "It has been assigned to me to be the guardian of a fallen man who lives down in the valley, a great sinner, most degraded. Let me assure you, it is an important task. I work hard." The first angel said, "That is an easy commission. I have often known sinners, and I have been their guardians many times. But it has now been assigned to me to be the guardian of a good saint who lives in the bower out yonder, and I assure you that this is an exceedingly difficult work, and most subtle." Said the first angel, "This is but assumption. How can guarding a saint be harder than guarding a sinner?" And the other answered, "What impertinence to call me assumptuous! I have stated but the truth. Methinks it is you who are assumptuous." Then the angels wrangled and fought, first with words, and then with fists and wings. Then they were fighting, Then, as they were fighting, an archangel came by, and he stopped them and said, "Why do you fight? And what is it all about? What is this all about? Know you not that it is the most unbecoming for a guardian angel to fight at the city gates? Tell me, what is your disagreement?" Then both angels spoke at once, each claiming that the work given to him was the harder, and that he deserved to be the greater recognized. The archangel shook his head and bethought him. Then he said, "My friends, I cannot say now which one of you has the greater claim upon honor and reward, but since the power is bestowed in me, therefore, for peace sake and for good guardianship, I give each of you the other's occupation. Since each of you insists that the other's task is the easier one, now go hence and be happy with your work." And the angels thus ordered went their ways, but each one looked back with the greater anger at the archangel, and in his heart each was saying, "Oh, these archangels! Every day they make life harder and still harder for us angels." But the archangel stood there, and once more he bethought them, and he said in his heart, "We have indeed to be watchful and to keep guardians over our guardian angels." The statue. Once there lived a man among the hills who possessed a statue wrought by an ancient master. It lay at his door face down, and he was not mindful of it. One day there passed by his house a man from the city, a man of knowledge, and seeing the statue he inquired of the owner, and he as if he would sell it. And the owner laughed and said, "And pray, who would want to buy that dull and dirty stone?" The man from the city said, "I will give you this piece of silver for it." And the other man was astonished and delighted. The statue was moved to the city upon the back of an elephant, and therefore many moons the man from the hills visited the city, and as he walked the street, he saw a crowd before a shop, and a man with a loud voice crying, "Come ye in, and behold the most beautiful and most wondrous statue in all the world. Only 2 silver pieces to come and look upon this most marvelous work of a master." Thereupon the man from the hills paid 2 silver pieces to enter the shop to see the statue that he himself had sold for 1 piece of silver. The Exchange. Once upon a crossroad, a poor poet met a rich stupid, and they conversed, and all that they said revealed but their discontent. Then the angel of the road passed by, and he laid his hand upon the shoulder of the two men, and behold, a miracle. The two men had now exchanged their possessions, and they parted. But strange to relate, the poet looked and found not in his hand, but dry moving sand, and the stupid closed his eyes and felt naught but moving clouds in his heart. Love and hate. A woman said unto a man, I love you. And the man said, It is in my heart to be worthy of your love. And the woman said, You love me not? And the man only gazed upon her and said nothing. And the woman cried aloud, I hate you. And the man said, Then it is also in my heart to be worthy of your hate. Dreams. Dreams. A man dreamed a dream, and when he awoke, he went to his soothsayer, and desired that his dream be made plain unto him. And the soothsayer said to the man, Come to me with the dreams you behold in your wakefulness, and I will tell you their meaning. But the dreams of your sleep belong neither to my wisdom nor your imagination. The Madman. It was in the garden of the madhouse that I met a youth with the face pale and lovely and full of wonder. And I sat beside him upon the bench, and I said, Why are you here? And he looked at me in astonishment and said, It is an unseemly question, yet I will answer you. My father would make of me a reproduction of himself. So also would my uncle. My mother would have me be an image of her illustrious father. My sister would hold me up her seafaring husband as the perfect example for me to follow. My brother thinks I should be like him, a fine athlete, and my teachers also, the doctor of philosophy and the music master and the logician. They too were determined, and each would have me but a reflection of his own face in the mirror. Therefore I came to this place. I find it more sane here. At least I can be myself. Then of a sudden he turned to me and he said, But to me, were you also driven to this place by education and good counsel? And I answered, No, I am a visitor. And he said, Oh, you are one of those who live in the madhouse and the other side of the wall. The Frogs. Upon a summer day, a frog said to his mate, I fear those people living in that house on the shore are disturbing. I'll read again. The Frogs. Upon a summer day, a frog said to his mate, I fear those people living in that house on the shore are disturbed by our night songs. And his mate answered and said, Well, do they not annoy our silence during the day with their talking? And the frog said, Let us not forget that we may sing too much in the night. And his mate answered, Let us not forget that they chatter and shout overmuch during the day. Said the frog, How about the bullfrogs who disturb with whole neighborhoods with his God-forbidden booming? And his mate replied, Aye, and what say you of the politician and the priest and of the scientist who come to these shores and fill the air with noisy and rhymeless sound? And the frog said, Well, let us be better than these human beings. Let us be quiet at night, and Let's keep our songs in our hearts, even though the moon calls for our rhythm and the stars for our rhyme. At least let us be silent for a night or two, or even for 3 nights. And his mate said, Very well, I agree. We shall see what your bountiful heart will bring forth. That night the frogs were silent, and they were silent the following night also, and upon the 3rd night. And strange to relate, the talkative woman who lived in the house beside the lake came down to breakfast on the 3rd day, and shouted to her husband, I have not slept these 3 nights. I was secure with sleep when the noise was frogs was in my ear. But something must have happened. They have not sung now for 3 nights, and I am almost maddened with sleeplessness. The frogs hearing this, he turned to his mate and said, winking his eye, and we were almost maddened with our silence. Were we not? And his mate answered, Yes, the silence of the night was heavy upon us. And I can see now that there is no need for us to cease our singing, for the comfort of those who must needs fill their emptiness with noise. And that night of the moon called not in vain for their rhythm, nor the stars for their rhyme. Laws and law-giving. Ages ago there was a great king, and he was wise, and he desired to lay laws unto his subjects. He called upon 1,000 wise men of 1,000 different tribes to come to his capital and lay down the laws. And all this came to pass. But when the 1,000 laws written upon parchment were put before the king, and he read them, he wept bitterly in his soul, for he had not known that there were 1,000 forms of crime in his kingdom. Then he called his scribe, and with a smile upon his mouth, he himself dictated laws, and his laws were but 7. And the 1,000 wise men left him in anger and returned to their tribes with the laws they had laid down, and every tribe followed the laws of its wise men. Therefore they have 1,000 laws even to our own day. It is a great country, but it has 1,000 prisons, and the prisons are full of women and men, breakers of 1,000 laws. It is indeed a great country, but the people thereof are descendants of 1,000 lawgivers, and of only one wise king. 1,000 lawgivers and only one wise king. Yesterday, tomorrow, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I said to my friend, You see her leaning upon the arm of that man? It was but yesterday that she leaned thus upon my arm. And my friend said, And tomorrow she will lean upon mine. I said, Behold her sitting close at his side. It was but yesterday she sat close beside me. And he answered, Tomorrow she will be sitting beside me. And I said, See, she drinks wine from his cup, and yesterday she drank from mine. And he said, Tomorrow she drinks from my cup. Then I said, See how she gazes at him with love and with yielding eyes. Yesterday she gazed thus upon me. And my friend said, It will be upon me she gazes tomorrow. I said, Do you not hear her now murmuring songs of love into his ear? Those very songs of love she murmured but yesterday into my ears. And my friend said, And tomorrow she will murmur them in mine. I said, Why, see, she is embracing him. It was but yesterday that she embraced me. And my friend said, She will embrace me tomorrow. Then I said, What a strange woman. But he answered, She is like unto life, possessed by all men, and like death, she conquers all men, and like eternity, she enfolds all men. The Philosopher and the Cobbler. There came to a cobbler's shop a philosopher with worn shoes, and the philosopher said to the cobbler, Please mend my shoes. And the cobbler said, I am mending another man's shoes now, and there are still other shoes to patch before I can come to yours. But leave your shoes here, and wear this other pair today, and come tomorrow for your own. Then the philosopher was indignant, and he said, I wear no shoes that are not mine own. And the cobbler said, Well then, you are in truth a philosopher, and cannot enfold your feet with the shoes of another man. Upon this very street there is another cobbler who understands philosophers better than I do. Go to him for your mending. Builders of bridges. Builders of bridges. In Antioch, where the river Assi grows to meet the sea, a bridge was built to bring one half of the city nearer to the other half. It was built of large stones carried from down among the hills, on the backs of the mules of Antioch. When the bridge was finished, upon the pillar thereof was engraved in Greek and in Aramaic, This bridge was built by King Antioch II, and all the people walked across the good bridge over the goodly river Assi. And upon an evening, the youth, deemed by some a little mad, descended into the pillar where the words were engraven, and he uncovered over the gravings with charcoal, and above it he wrote, The stones of this bridge were brought down from the hills by the mules. In passing to and fro over it, you are riding upon the backs of mules of Antioch, builders of this bridge. And when the people read what the youth had written, some of them laughed, and some marveled, and some said, Ah, yes, we know who has done this. Is he not a little mad? But one mule said, laughing, to another mule, Do you not remember what we did that we did carry those stones? And yet until now it has been said that the bridge was built by the king Antiochus. The field of Zad. Upon the road of Zad, a traveler met a man who lived in a nearby village, and the traveler pointed with his hand to the vast field, asking the man, saying, Was not this the battleground where King Alim overcame his enemies? And the man answered and said, This has never been a battleground. There once stood on this field a great city of Zad, and it was burnt down to ashes. But now it was a good field, is it not? And the traveler and the man parted. Not a half mile further, the traveler met another man, and pointing to the field again, he said, So that is where the great city of Zad once stood. And the man said, There has never been a city in this place, but once there was a monastery here, and it was destroyed by the people of the southern country. Shortly thereafter, on that very road of Zad, the traveler met a third man, and pointed once more to the field, and he said, Is it not true that this is the place where once stood a great monastery? And the man answered, There has never been a monastery in this neighborhood, but our fathers and our forefathers have told us that once there fell a great meteor on this field. Then the traveler walked on, wondering in his heart, and he met a very old man, and saluted him and said, Sir, upon this road I have met 3 men who lived in this neighborhood, and I have asked each of them about this field, and each one denied what the other one said, and each one told me a new tale that the other one had not told. Then the old man raised his head and answered, My friend, each and every one of these men told you what was indeed so, but few of us are able to add a fact to a different fact and make a truth thereof. The Golden Belt. Once upon a day, two men who met on the road were walking together towards Salamis, the city of columns, in the mid-afternoon. They came to a wide river, and there was no bridge to cross it. They must needs swim, or seek another road unknown to them. And they said to one another, Let us swim. After all, the river is not wide. And they threw themselves into the water and swam. And one of the men who had always known rivers and the ways of rivers in the midstream suddenly began to lose himself, and to be carried away by the rushing waters, while the other, who had never swum before, crossed the river straight away and stood upon the farther bank. Then, seeing his companion still wrestling with the stream, he threw himself again into the waters and brought himself also safely to the stone, or to the shore. And the man who had been swept away by the current said, But you told me you could not swim. How then did you cross that river with such assurance? And the second man answered, My friend, do you see this belt which girdles me? It's full of golden coins that I have earned for my wife and my children, a full year's work. It is the weight of this belt of gold that carries me across the river to my wife and my children. And my wife and my children were upon the shoulders as I swam. And the two men walked on together towards Salamis. The Red Earth. Said a tree to a man, My roots are in the deep red earth. I shall give you of my fruit. And the man said to the tree, How alike we are. My roots are also deep in the red earth, and the red earth gives you power to bestow upon me of your fruit. And the red earth teaches me to receive from you with thanksgiving. The full moon. The full moon rose in glory upon the town, and all the dogs of that town began to bark at the moon. Only one dog did not bark, and he said to them in a grave voice, Awaken not stillness from her sleep, nor bring you the moon to the earth with your bark. Then all the dogs ceased barking in awful silence, but the dog who had spoken to them continued barking for silence the rest of the night. The Hermit Prophet. Once there lived a hermit prophet, and thrice a moon he would go down to the great city in the marketplace, and he would preach giving and sharing to the people, and he was eloquent, and his fame was upon the land. Upon an evening, 3 men came to his hermitage, and he greeted them, and they said, You have been preaching giving and sharing, and you sought to teach those who have much to give unto those who have little. And we doubt not that your fame has brought you riches. Now come and give us your riches, for we are in need. And the hermit answered and said, My friends, I have naught but this bed and this mat and this jug of water. Take them, if it is of your desire. I have neither gold nor silver. Then they looked down with disdain upon him, and turned their faces from him. And the last man stood at the door for a moment and said, Oh, you cheat, you fraud, you teach and preach that which you yourself do not perform. The old wine. Once there lived a rich man who was justly proud of his cellar and the wine therein. And there was one jug of ancient vintage kept for some occasion known only to himself. The governor of the state visited him, and he bethought him, and said, That jug shall not be opened for a mere governor. And the bishop of the diocese visited him, and he said to himself, Nay, I will not open that jug. He will not know its value, nor would its aroma reach his nostrils. The prince of the realm came and supped with him, and he thought, It is too royal a wine for a mere princeling. And even on the day of his own nephew was married, he said to himself, No, not to these guests shall that jug be brought forth. And years passed, and he died, an old man, and he was buried like unto every seed and acorn. And upon the day he was buried, the ancient jug was brought out with the other jugs of wine, and it was shared by the peasants of the neighborhood, and none knew its great age. To them, all that is poured into a cup is only wine. The Two Poems. Many centuries ago, on the road to Athens, two poets met, and they were glad to see one another. And one poet asked the other, saying, What have you composed of late? And how goes it with your lyre? And the other poet answered and said with pride, I have but now finished the greatest of my poems, perchance the greatest poem yet written in Greek. It is an invocation to Zeus the Supreme. Then he took from beneath his cloak a parchment, saying, Here, behold, I have it with me, and I would fain read it to you. Come, let us in the shade of that white cypress. And the poet read his poem, and it was a long poem. And the other poet said in kindliness, This is a great poem. It will live through the ages, and in it you shall be glorified. And the first poet said calmly, And what have you been writing these days? And the other answered, I have written but little, only 8 lines in remembrance of a child playing in the garden. And he recited the lines. The first poet said, Not so bad, not so bad. And they parted. And now, after 2,000 years, the 8 lines of the one poet are read in every tongue, and are loved and cherished. And though the other poems have indeed come down through the ages in libraries and in cells of scholars, and though it is remembered, it is neither loved nor read. Lady Ruth. 3 men once looked from afar upon a white house that stood alone on a green hill. One of them said, That is the house of Lady Ruth. She is an old witch. The second man said, You are wrong. Lady Ruth is a beautiful woman who lives there consecrated unto her dreams. The third man said, You are both wrong. Lady Ruth is the holder of this vast land, and she draws blood from her serfs. And they walked on discussing Lady Ruth. Then, when they came to a crossroad, they met an old man, and one of them asked, saying, Would you please tell us about Lady Ruth, who lives in the white house upon the hill? And the old man raised his head and smiled upon them and said, I am 90 years, and I remember Lady Ruth when I was but 66. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the name of the number of the page. When I was but a boy, he said. But Lady Ruth died 80 years ago, and now the house is empty. The owls hoot therein, and sometimes the people say the place is haunted. The Moose and the Cat. Once on an evening, a poet met a peasant, and the poet was distant, and the peasant was shy. Yet they conversed, and the peasant said, Let me tell you a little story which I heard of late. A mouse was caught in a trap, and while he was happily eating the cheese that lay therein, a cat stood by. The mouse trembled a while, but he knew he was safe within the trap. Then the cat said, "You are eating your last meal, my friend." "Yes," answered the mouse. "One life have I, therefore one death. But what of you? They tell me you have 9 lives. Doesn't that mean that you will have to die 9 times?" And the peasant looked at the poet and he said, "Is not this story strange?" And the poet answered him not. But he walked away, saying in his soul, "To be sure, 9 lives have we, 9 lives to be sure, and we shall die 9 times. 9 times shall we die. Perhaps it were better to have but 1 life, caught in a trap. The life of a peasant with a bit of cheese for the last meal. And yet, are we not kin unto those lions of the desert and the jungle?" The Curse. An old man of the sea once said to me, "It was 30 years ago that a sailor ran away with my daughter, and I cursed them both in my heart, for of all the world I loved but my daughter. Not long after that, the sailor youth went down with his ship to the bottom of the sea, and with him my lovely daughter was lost unto me. Now therefore behold in me the murderer of a youth and a maid. It was my curse that destroyed them, and now, on my way to the grave, I seek God's forgiveness." This, the old man said, but there was a tone of bragging in his words, and it seemed that he was still proud of the power of his curse. Pomegranates. There was once a man who had many pomegranate trees in his orchard, and for many autumn he would put his pomegranates on silvery trays outside of his dwelling. Upon the trays he would place signs upon which he himself had written, "Take one for aught, you are welcome." But people passed by, and no one took of the fruit. Then the man bethought him, and one autumn he placed no pomegranates on silvery trays outside his dwelling, but he raised a sign in large lettering, "Here we have the best pomegranates in the land, but we sell them for more silver than any other pomegranate." And now behold, all the men and women of the neighborhood came rushing to buy. God and many gods. In the city of Caiaphas, the sophist stood on the steps of the temple and preached many gods, and the people said in their hearts, "We know all this. Do they not live with us and follow us wherever we go?" Not long after, another man stood in the marketplace and spoke unto the people and said, "There is no God." For many who heard him were glad of his teachings, for they were afraid of gods. And upon another day there came a man of great eloquence, and he said, "There is but one God." And now the people were dismayed, for in their hearts they feared the judgment of the one God more than that of the many gods. At that same season there came yet another man, and he said to the people, "There are 3 gods, and they dwell upon the wind as one. And they have a vast gracious mother, who is also their mate, and their sister." Then everyone was comforted, for they said in their secret, "3 gods in one must needs disagreement over our failings, and besides, their gracious mother will surely be an advocate for us poor weaklings." Yet even to this day there are those in the city of Caiaphas who wrangle and argue with each other about many gods and no God, and one God and three gods in one, and a gracious mother of gods. She who was deaf. Once there lived a rich man who had a young wife, and she was stone deaf, not stone deaf. Once there lived a rich man who had a young wife, and she was stone deaf. And upon a morning, when they were breaking their fast, she spoke to him, and she said, Yesterday I visited the marketplace, and there were exhibited silken raiments from Damascus, and overchiefs from India, necklaces from Persia, and bracelets from Yemen. It seems that the caravans had but just brought these things to our city, and now behold, in rags, yet the wife of a rich man, I would have some of those beautiful things. The husband, still busy with his morning coffee, said, My dear, there is no reason why you should not go down to the street and buy all that your heart may desire. And the deaf wife said, No, you always say, No, no. Must I needs appear in tatters among our friends to shame your wealth and people? And the husband said, I did not say no. You may go forth freely to the marketplace and purchase the most beautiful apparel and jewels that have come to our city. But again the wife misread his words, and she replied, Of all rich men you are the most miserly. You would deny me everything of beauty and loveliness, while other women of my age walk the gardens and the city clothed in rich raiment. And she began to weep, and as her tears fell upon her breast, she cried out again, You always say, Nay, nay, to me, when I desire a garment or jewel. Then the husband was moved, and he stood up and took out his purse and a handful of gold, and placed it before her, saying in a kindly voice, Go down to the market, my dear, and buy all that you will. From that day onward, the deaf young wife, whenever she desired anything, would appear before her husband with a pearly tear in her eye, and he, in silence, would take out a handful of gold and place it in her lap. Now it chanced the young woman fell in love with a youth whose habit was into making long journeys, and when he was away, she would sit in her casement and weep. When her husband found her thus weeping, he would say in his heart, There must be some new caravan and some silken garment and rare jewels in the street. And he would take a handful of gold and place it before her. The Quest. 1,000 years ago, two philosophers met on the slope of Lebanon, and one said to the other, Where goest thou? And the other answered, I am seeking after a fountain of youth, which I know wells out among these hills. I have found writings which tell of the fountain flowering toward the sun. And you, what are you seeking? The first man answered, I am seeking after the mystery of death. Then each of the two philosophers conceived that each other was lacking in his great science, and they began to wrangle and to accuse each other of spiritual blindness. Now, while the two philosophers were loud upon the wind, a stranger, a man who was deemed a simpleton in his own village, passed by, and when he heard the two in hot dispute, he stood a while and listened to their argument. Then he came near to them and said, My good men, it seems you both really belong to the same school of philosophy, and that you're speaking of the same thing, only you speak in different words. One of you seeks the fountain of youth, and the other seeks the mystery of death. Yet indeed they are but one, and as one they dwell in you both. Then the stranger turned away, faring well, sages. And as he departed, he laughed, a pointed laughter. The two philosophers looked at each other in silence for a moment, And they laughed also. And one of them said, Well now, shall we not walk and seek together? The scepter. Said the king to his wife, Madame, you are not truly a queen. You are too vulgar and ungracious to be my mate. Said his wife, Sir, you deem yourself a king, but you are only a poor soundling. Now these words angered the king, and he took his scepter with his hands and struck the queen upon her forehead with his golden scepter. At that moment the Lord Chamberlain entered, and he said, Well, well, Majesty, that scepter was fashioned by the greatest artisan of the land. Alas, some day you and the queen shall be forgotten, and the scepter shall be kept, a thing of beauty from generation to generation. And now that you have drawn blood from her Majesty's head, sire, the scepter shall be more considered and remembered. The path. There lived among the hills a woman and her son, and he was her firstborn and her only child. And the boy died of a fever whilst the physician stood. The mother was distraught with sorrow, and she cried to the physician, and besought him, saying, Tell me, what was it that made quiet his striving and silent his song? And the physician said, It was the fever. And the mother said, What is the fever? And the physician answered, I cannot explain it. It is a thing infinitely small that visits the body, and we cannot see it with our human eye. Then the physician left her, and she kept repeating to herself something infinitely small. We cannot see it with our human eye. And at evening the priest came to counsel her, and she wept and she cried, Oh, why have I lost my son, my only son, my firstborn? And the priest answered, My child, it is the will of God. And the woman said, What is God, and where is God? I would see God, that I may tear my bosom before him, and pour the blood of my heart at his feet. Tell me where I shall find him. And the priest said, God is infinitely vast. He is not to be seen with our eye. Then the woman cried out, The infinitely small has slain my son through the will of the infinitely great. Then what are we? What are we? At that moment the woman's mother came into the room with the shroud for the dead boy, and she heard the words of the priest, and also her daughter's cry, and she laid down the shroud, and took her daughter's hand in her own hand, and she said, My daughter, we are ourselves infinitely small and infinitely great, and we are the path between the two. The Whale and the Butterfly. Once on an evening, a man and a woman found themselves together in a stagecoach. They had met before. The man was a poet, and he had sat beside the woman. He sought to amuse her with stories, some that were of his own weaving, and some that were not his own. But even while he was speaking, the lady went to sleep. Then suddenly the coach lurched, and she awoke, and she said, I admire your interpretation of the story of Jonah and the whale. And the poet said, But, madame, I have been telling you a story of mine own for about a butterfly and a white rose, and how they behaved the one to the other. Peace contagious. One branch in bloom said to his neighboring branch, This is a dull and empty day. And the other branch answered, It is indeed empty and dull. At that moment a sparrow alighted on one of the branches, and then another sparrow nearby, and one of the sparrows chirped and said, My mate has left me. And the other sparrow cried, My mate has also gone, and she will not return. And what care I? Then the two began to twitter and scold, and soon they were fighting and making harsh noises upon the air. All of a sudden, the two sparrows came sailing from the sky and sat quietly beside the restless two, and there was calm, and there was peace. Then the four flew away together in pairs. And the first branch said to his neighboring branch, "That was a mighty zigzag of sound." And the other branch answered, "Call it what you will. It is now both peaceful and spacious. And if the upper air makes peace, it seems to me that those who dwell in the lower might make peace also. Will you not wave in your wind a little nearer to me?" And the first branch said, "Oh, perchance, for peace' sake, ere the spring is over." And then he waved himself with the strong wind to embrace her. The shadow. Upon a June day, the grass said to the shadow of an elm tree, "You move to right and left over often, and you disturb my peace." And the shadow answered and said, "Not I, not I. Look skyward. There is a tree that moves in the wind to the east and to the west, between the sun and the earth." And the grass looked up, and for the first time beheld the tree, and said in its heart, "Why, behold, there is a larger grass than myself." And the grass was silent. '70. The poet youth said to the princess, "I love you." And the princess answered, "And I love you too, my child." "But I am not your child. I am a man, and I love you." And she said, "I am the mother of sons and daughters, and they are fathers and mothers of sons and daughters, and one of the sons of my sons is older than you." And the poet youth said, "But I love you." It was not long after that the princess died, but ere her last breath was received again by the greater breath of the earth, she said within her soul, "My beloved, mine only son, my youth poet, it may yet be that some day we shall meet again, and I shall not be 70. Finding God. Two men were walking in a valley, and one man pointed with his finger toward the mountainside and said, "See you that hermitage? There lives a man who has long divorced the world. He seeks but after God, and naught else upon the earth." And the other man said, "He shall not find God until he leaves his hermitage, and the aloneness of his hermitage, and returns to our world to share our joy and pain, to dance with our dancers at the wedding feast, and to weep with those who weep around the coffins of our dead." And the other man was convinced in his heart, though in spite of his conviction he answered, "I agree with all that you say, yet I believe the hermit is a good man. And may it not well be that a good man by his absence does better than the seeming goodness of these many men?" The river. In the valley of Kadisha, where the mighty river flows, two little streams met and spoke to one another. One stream said, "How come you, my friend?" Or, "How came you, my friend? And how was your path?" And the other answered, "My path was most encumbered. The wheel of the mill was broken, and the master farmer who used to conduct me from my channel to his plants is dead. I struggled down, oozing with the filth of those who do not but sit and bake their laziness in the sun. But how was your path, my brother?" And the other stream answered and said, "Mine was a different path. I came down the hills among the fragrant flowers and shy willows. Men and women drank of me with silvery cups, and little children paddled their rosy feet in my edges, and there was laughter all about me. And there were sweet songs. What a pity that your path was not so happy. At that moment the river spoke with a loud voice and said, come in, come in. We are going to the sea. Come in, come in. Speak no more. Be with me now. We are going to the sea. Come in, for in me you shall forget your wanderings, sad or gay. Come in, and you and I will forget all our ways when we reach the heart of the mother, our mother, the sea. The Two Hunters. Upon a day in May, Joy and Sorrow met beside a lake. They greeted one another, and they sat down near the quiet waters and conversed. Joy spoke of the beauty which is upon the earth, and of the daily wonder of life in the forest and among the hills, and of the songs heard at dawn and eventide. The Sorrow spoke and agreed with all that Joy had said, for Sorrow knew the magic of the hour and the beauty thereof. And Sorrow was eloquent when he spoke of May and in the fields among the hills. And Joy and Sorrow talked long together, and they agreed upon all things which they knew. Now there passed by on the other side of the lake two hunters. And as they looked across the water, one of them said, I wonder who are those two persons? And the others said, did you say two? I see only one. The first hunter said, but there are two. And the second said, there is only one that I can see, and the reflection in the lake is only one. Nay, there are two, said the first hunter, and the reflection in the still water is of two persons. But the second man said again, only one do I see. And again the other said, but I see two plainly. And even to this day one hunter says that the other sees double, while the other says, my friend is somewhat blind. The Other Wanderer. Once on a time I met another man of the roads. He too was a little mad, and thus he spake to me. And thus he spoke to me. I'll start over. Once on a time. Oh, goodness. I'm getting close to the end here. I need water. Excuse me. The Other Wanderer. Once on a time I met another man of the roads. He too was a little mad, and thus he spoke to me. I am a wanderer. Oftentimes it seems that I walk the earth among pygmies, and because my head is 70 cubits farther from the earth than theirs, it creates higher and freer thoughts. But in truth I walk not among men, but above them, and all they can see of me is my footprints in their open fields. And often I have heard them discuss and disagree over the shape and size of my footprints, for there are some who say, these are the tracks of a mammoth that roams the earth in the far past, and the others say, nay, these are places where meteors have fallen from the distant stars. But you, my friend, you know full well that they are not save for the footprints of a wanderer. And that is the end of The Wanderer. It's an interesting collection. Thank you for joining me. This has been enjoyable. I hope you have a great evening. Goodbye.